When 19-year-old Emma saw the elderly man struggling with heavy grocery bags outside the supermarket, she had no idea that her simple act of kindness would make her the center of the biggest inheritance scandal in the city's history. But what happened 3 weeks later at the law office would change everything she thought she knew about helping strangers. Emma Mitchell's life was a constant battle against circumstances that seemed determined to crush her dreams. The 19-year-old medical student lived in a world where every dollar mattered, where every decision carried weight far beyond what someone her age should bear. Her alarm clock buzzed at 5:30 every morning in her tiny studio apartment. The apartment was barely larger than a dorm room, located in the worst part of town where sirens wailed through the night and neighbors shouted through paper-thin walls. But it was what she could afford on her two part-time salaries. Emma would stumble out of bed, her body aching from the previous day's work. She would shower quickly in the cramped bathroom where the hot water lasted exactly 3 minutes. Then she would dress in her worn but clean uniform and catch the earliest bus to the university campus. Her first job started at 6 in the morning at the campus cafeteria. Emma worked the breakfast shift, serving eggs and coffee to students who had more money in their wallets than she earned in a week. She watched them complain about the food while she calculated whether she could afford lunch that day. The other cafeteria workers were kind to her. Nuria, the head cook, often slipped Emma extra food when the supervisors weren't looking. "You're too skinny, mija," Maria would say, pressing a wrapped sandwich into Emma's hands. "You can't study if you don't eat." After her morning shift, Emma would race across campus to her classes. Medical school was demanding, under the best circumstances. For someone working 2 jobs and struggling financially, it was nearly impossible. But Emma persevered, taking detailed notes, studying in every spare moment, determined not to let her circumstances define her future. Her professors noticed her dedication. Dr. Sarah Thompson, who taught anatomy, had pulled Emma aside after class one day. "Emma, your test scores are exceptional, but you look exhausted. Are you taking care of yourself?" Emma smiled weakly. "I'm fine, Dr. Thompson, just working hard." Dr. Thompson had studied her with concern. "If you ever need help, resources, anything at all, please come see me. Students like you, the dedicated ones, the ones who truly understand what medicine means, you're rare. Don't let anything prevent you from becoming the doctor you're meant to be." Those words meant everything to Emma. They reminded her why she pushed through the exhaustion, the hunger, the constant worry about money. Her second job started at 5 in the evening at Romano's family restaurant. She spent her nights in the steamy kitchen, washing endless stacks of dishes, scrubbing pots, cleaning floors. Her hands were always red and raw from the hot water and harsh detergents. The restaurant owner, Mr. Romano, was gruff but fair. He paid Emma in cash at the end of each week, understanding that she needed the money immediately. "You work harder than kids twice your age," he often told her. "Whatever you're studying for, you're going to make it." But it was the nights that were hardest for Emma. After her shift ended at 11, she would catch the last bus home, her feet aching, her back sore. She would arrive at her apartment exhausted, but still need to study. She would sit at her small kitchen table under the flickering fluorescent light, reading medical textbooks until her eyes burned. Sometimes, in those quiet moments, the weight of her situation would hit her. She was completely alone in the world. Her mother, Jennifer, had been her everything. Jennifer Mitchell had been a nurse herself, working double shifts to support Emma after her husband abandoned them. Emma could still remember her mother's voice, weak from the chemotherapy, whispering, "Promise me you'll become a doctor, Emma. Promise me you'll help people.
the way I always wanted to but never could. Emma had held her mother's hand in that sterile hospital room and made the promise she would become a doctor, no matter what it took. Her father remained a ghost in her memory. David Mitchell had left when Emma was 2 years old, claiming he couldn't handle the responsibility of a family. He had never paid child support, never called, never acknowledged Emma's existence. Sometimes Emma wondered if her life would have been different with a father, but she had learned not to dwell on things she couldn't change. The students in her medical school classes came from wealthy families. They talked casually about their parents' medical practices, about summer homes and exotic vacations. They drove expensive cars and wore designer clothes. They studied together in coffee shops that Emma couldn't afford to enter. Emma tried not to feel bitter about the differences, but it was hard. While her classmates complained about their allowances being late, Emma was calculating whether she could afford both rent and groceries for the month. She had applied for every scholarship available, but competition was fierce. Her grades were excellent, but many scholarships required extracurricular activities that Emma simply didn't have time for. How could she volunteer at free clinics when she was working 2 jobs just to survive? That cold Saturday morning in November, Emma was running on 4 hours of sleep and her third cup of coffee. She had worked at the restaurant until midnight the night before, then stayed up until 4 studying for her physiology exam. Her body ached, her head pounded, and she was questioning whether she could keep up this impossible pace. She stood in her tiny kitchen, counting the money in her wallet for the third time, $15.37. That was all she had until her next paycheck on Tuesday. Rent was due in 3 days, and she was still $40 short. Emma made a list on the back of an envelope. Ramen noodles, bread, peanut butter, bananas. Basic necessities that would last her the week. She allowed herself one small luxury, a chocolate bar. It was her weekly treat, the one thing that made her feel like a normal college student instead of someone just surviving. The walk to the supermarket took 20 minutes because Emma couldn't afford the bus fare. The November wind cut through her thin jacket, and she pulled it tighter around herself. The jacket had been her mother's, and wearing it made Emma feel less alone. Inside the supermarket, Emma moved quickly through the aisles. She knew exactly where to find the cheapest options. She had memorized which brands offered the most nutrition for the lowest price. Shopping had become a strategic operation, every item carefully considered. At the checkout, Emma watched the total climb, $14.63. She handed over the exact amount, leaving her with 74 cents to her name. 74 cents until Tuesday. As she walked through the parking lot, her thin plastic bags cutting into her fingers, Emma tried to push down the despair that threatened to overwhelm her. She was so tired, tired of being hungry, tired of worrying about money, tired of feeling like she was fighting an impossible battle. That's when she saw him.
Harold Whitman stood next to his silver Mercedes, scattered groceries at his feet, looking utterly helpless. At 73 years old, Harold was distinguished and well-dressed, but in that moment, he appeared vulnerable and confused. Emma paused, watching as other shoppers walked past the elderly man without stopping. A woman in an expensive coat actually stepped over a rolling can of soup without even glancing at Harold. A young man in a business suit walked by while talking loudly on his phone, completely ignoring the scene. Harold's walking cane had fallen several feet away. He was bending slowly, painfully, trying to reach the scattered items. Emma could see the frustration and embarrassment in his movements. For a moment, Emma hesitated. She was exhausted, cold, and eager to get home. She had studying to do, and every minute mattered. Plus, she didn't really have time to miss her bus. But then Harold looked up, and Emma saw something in his eyes that stopped her cold. it wasn't just frustration or embarrassment. It was loneliness. Deep, profound loneliness that reminded Emma of the way her mother had looked in those final days in the hospital. Without another thought, Emma walked over to Harold. "Excuse me, sir, do you need some help?" Harold looked up, surprised. His eyes were a clear blue, intelligent and kind. "Oh, my dear, how thoughtful of you. I'm afraid these old hands aren't as steady as they used to be." Emma immediately set down her own bags and began gathering Harold's groceries. She noticed they were high-quality items, organic vegetables, premium coffee, expensive olive oil, but she made no comment about the obvious difference in their circumstances. "I'm so clumsy," Harold said, his voice carrying a slight tremor. "I don't know how everything went flying like that." "Don't worry about it. Happens to everyone. Are any of the eggs broken?" Harold watched Emma work with growing amazement. Here was a young woman who was clearly struggling financially. He could see it in her worn clothes, her thin frame, her tired eyes. But she was helping him without hesitation. "I'm Harold," Emma helped him to his feet. "Harold Whitman." "Emma," she replied with a warm smile. "Emma Mitchell. Nice to meet you, Mr. Whitman." As they loaded the groceries into Harold's car, Harold observed Emma carefully. She was polite, efficient, and genuinely kind. She asked about his well-being, made sure he was steady on his feet, and even cleaned off his walking cane before handing it back to him. "Emma, you're an angel," Harold said. "How can I ever thank you?" Emma's response would echo in Harold's mind for weeks to come. "You don't need to thank me, Mr. Whitman. Just pass it forward when you can." Harold was taken aback by her response. No request for money, no expectation of reward, just a simple hope that kindness would continue. "Please let me give you a ride somewhere," Harold insisted. "It's the least I can do." Emma glanced at her watch. The next bus wouldn't arrive for 20 minutes and she was already cold. "Well, if you're sure it's not too much trouble, I'd appreciate a ride to the bus stop on 5th Street. As they drove, Harold found himself genuinely curious about this remarkable young woman. "Are you a student, Emma?" "Yes, sir. I'm studying medicine at the university." "Medicine? How wonderful. That's a challenging field." Emma nodded. "It is, but it's what I've always wanted to do. My mom was a nurse, and she always said medicine was the most noble profession because you get to help people when they need it most." Harold heard the past tense and sensed a story there, but he didn't pry. Instead, he asked, "And what kind of medicine interests you?" "Pediatrics," Emma said, her face lighting up. "I love working with children. They're so resilient, you know? Even when they're sick or scared, they still have this amazing capacity for hope." Harold was struck by the maturity in Emma's voice, the depth of her conviction. This wasn't someone who had chosen medicine for prestige or money. This was someone who truly understood what it meant to serve others. When they reached the bus stop, Harold turned to Emma. "Emma, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you seem like an exceptional young woman. Medicine is lucky to have someone like you." Emma blushed slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Whitman. That means a lot." As Emma got out of the car, Harold called after her. "Emma, would you mind if I gave you my card? I don't have many opportunities to meet genuinely good people anymore." Emma hesitated. She didn't want Harold to think she was after something, but there was something about the elderly man that reminded her of her grandfather, who had died when she was young. "Of course," she said, accepting the simple business card. Harold watched Emma walk to the bus stop, her shoulders straight despite her obvious exhaustion. As his driver, yes, he had been driving himself, but he did have a driver, pulled away, Harold made a decision that would change both their lives forever.
Harold Whitman was not just any elderly man struggling with groceries. He was one of the wealthiest individuals in the city, with a net worth of $47 million. He owned a chain of successful restaurants, several real estate ventures, and had investments that generated more money in a month than most people earned in a year. But wealth, Harold had learned, was both a blessing and a curse. That evening, Harold sat in his massive study in his Beacon Hill mansion. The room was filled with leather-bound books, expensive artwork, and photographs of a life well lived. But tonight, Harold felt neither satisfied nor content. Earlier that day, he had received devastating news from his oncologist, Dr. Martinez. The cancer had returned, and this time it was aggressive. 6 months, maybe less, Dr. Martinez had said. Harold should get his affairs in order. Harold poured himself a glass of 30-year-old scotch and reflected on his life. He had built a business empire from nothing. He had traveled the world, owned beautiful homes, collected art. By any measure, he had been successful. But what did he have to show for it, really? His wife, Margaret, had died 5 years earlier. His relationship with his children was strained at best. His son, Thomas, called only when he needed money. His daughter-in-law, also named Margaret, made no secret of her anticipation of Harold's death and the inheritance that would follow. Harold's grandchildren were equally disappointing. Richard, Elizabeth, and Catherine had grown up privileged and entitled. They had never worked for anything, never struggled, never learned the value of money or the importance of character. When was the last time any of them had shown genuine kindness to a stranger? When had they ever helped someone without expecting something in return? Harold thought about Emma Mitchell. In 30 minutes, this young woman had shown him more genuine human warmth than his own family had in years. She had helped him not because of who he was or what he might give her, but simply because it was the right thing to do. That night, Harold called his attorney, Robert Hayes. "Harold, I need to see you tomorrow. I want to make some changes to my will." "Of course, Harold. Major changes?" Harold looked at Emma's simple smile in his memory and made a decision that would shock everyone who knew him. "Yes, Robert. Very major changes."
Emma was in the campus library, surrounded by medical textbooks and empty coffee cups. She had just finished a 12-hour study session for her upcoming biochemistry exam when her phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but Emma answered anyway. It might be about a job, and she couldn't afford to miss any opportunities. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Robert Hayes from Hayes, Morgan and Associates." Emma's heart sank. A lawyer calling her could only mean trouble. Had she missed a payment somewhere? Was there some legal issue she wasn't aware of? I'm sorry, but I think you might have the wrong person," Emma said carefully. "Are you Emma Mitchell, age 19, student at City Medical College, currently residing at 1247 Oak Street, apartment 3B? The specific details made Emma nervous. "Yes, that's me, but I don't understand why a law firm would be calling me." "Ms. Mitchell, I need you to come to our offices immediately. It concerns the estate of Harold Whitman." Emma's breath caught in her throat. Harold, the kind, elderly man that she had helped with his groceries? Mr. Whitman? Is he okay? There was a pause before Robert Hayes responded. "I am afraid Mr. Whitman passed away 2 weeks ago from complications related to cancer. I'm very sorry for your loss." Emma felt tears spring to her eyes. She had only met Harold once, but he had seemed so alive, so vital. The news hit her harder than she expected. "I don't understand," she said. "Why are you calling me?" "Mr. Whitman left very specific instructions about you in his will, Ms. Mitchell."
You need to be present for the reading. Can you come to our offices this afternoon at 3 o'clock? Emma looked around the library, at her textbooks and notes spread across the table. She had planned to study all afternoon, and she couldn't afford to miss her evening shift at the restaurant. But something in the lawyer's voice told her this was important. Yes, I'll be there. Hayes gave her the address, which was in the most expensive part of downtown. Emma had never been to that area except to walk through it on her way to other places. After hanging up, Emma sat in stunned silence. Harold was dead. The kind man who had shown her such gratitude for a simple act of helping was gone. She felt a profound sadness that surprised her with its intensity. Emma packed up her books and headed home to change clothes. She only owned one outfit that could be considered appropriate for a law office, a simple black dress that she had worn to her mother's funeral, and a pair of scuffed black shoes. Looking at herself in the mirror, Emma felt out of place before she had even left her apartment. What could Harold have possibly left her? They had met only once. Maybe he had left her a small token, a book, or perhaps a few $100s for her education. Even that seemed unlikely. The bus ride to downtown took 45 minutes and cost Emma money she couldn't afford to spend. But curiosity and respect for Harold's memory compelled her to go. The law offices of Hayes, Morgan, and Associates occupied 3 floors of a glimmering skyscraper. Emma felt intimidated as she walked through the marble lobby, past expensive artwork and well-dressed professionals. The receptionist, a polished woman in her 40s, looked Emma up and down with barely concealed skepticism. "Are you here for the Whitman will reading?" "Yes, I'm Emma Mitchell." The receptionist checked her list. "Yes, here you are. 3rd floor, conference room A. The elevator is to your right." Emma rode the elevator to the 3rd floor, her palms sweating with nervousness. What was she doing here? She clearly didn't belong in this world of expensive suits and marble floors.
Conference Room A was imposing, with a long mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs. Large windows offered a panoramic view of the sea. Emma had never been in a room this fancy. As she entered, she found the room already occupied by several well-dressed people who turned to stare at her. Their expressions ranged from curious to openly hostile. "You must be Emma," said a distinguished man in an expensive suit. He was tall, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I'm Robert Hayes, Mr. Whitman's attorney." Emma nodded nervously and took the seat Hayes indicated. She felt the eyes of everyone in the room on her, studying her cheap dress and worn shoes. "Let me introduce you to Harold's family," Hayes continued. "This is Margaret Whitman, Harold's daughter-in-law." Margaret was a woman in her late 50s, impeccably dressed in a designer suit. She had perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of manicured appearance that spoke of wealth and privilege. She looked at Emma with undisguised disdain. "This is Thomas Whitman, Harold's son." Thomas was a man in his early 60s who clearly took after his father in terms of build and bearing, but his expression was cold and calculating. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Emma made in 6 months. "And these are Harold's grandchildren, Richard, Elizabeth, and Catherine." The 3 grandchildren were all in their 20s or early 30s, all perfectly groomed and expensively dressed. Richard wore a Rolex that caught the light as he moved. Elizabeth's handbag was clearly designer, and Catherine's shoes probably cost more than Emma's rent. They all looked at Emma with a mixture of confusion and annoyance, clearly wondering what this poorly dressed young woman was doing at their family gathering. "Now then," Hayes said, settling into his chair at the head of the table. We are here for the reading of Harold's last will and testament. Harold was very specific about wanting Ms. Mitchell present for this. Margaret Whitman spoke up, her voice sharp with irritation. I still don't understand why some random stranger needs to be here for a private family matter. Emma felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She wanted to leave, to escape the hostile stares and uncomfortable tension, but respect for Harold kept her in her seat. You will understand shortly, Mrs. Whitman, Hayes replied diplomatically. He opened a thick leather folder and removed several documents. Harold spent considerable time preparing this will. He wanted to ensure his wishes were clearly understood. Hayes cleared his throat and began reading in his formal lawyer voice. I, Harold James Whitman, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils. Emma listened as Hayes read through various bequests. Harold had left money to several charities, $50,000 to the Children's Hospital, $25,000 to an animal shelter, $30,000 to a literacy program. He had remembered his longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, leaving her $50,000 and a pension for life. He had left money to old friends and business associates. Then Hayes came to the family bequests. To my son Thomas, I leave the sum of $100,000 and my collection of first edition books, with the hope that he will find time to read them and understand the value of knowledge over material wealth. Thomas frowned. $100,000 was significant, but he had clearly expected much more. To my daughter-in-law, Margaret, I leave the sum of $50,000 and my gratitude for the years she cared for my son, though I regret that our relationship never developed the warmth I had hoped for. Margaret's face was turning red. $50,000 was insulting, given Harold's wealth. To my grandchildren, Richard, Elizabeth, and Catherine, I leave $50,000 each, with the requirement that they use this money to fund a year of volunteer service with charitable organizations. Perhaps through serving others, they will learn the value of kindness and compassion. The grandchildren looked stunned. They expected millions, not thousands with strings attached. But Hayes wasn't finished. However, he continued, and the word hung in the air like a thunderclap, the remainder of my estate, including my house, my business interests, my investments, and all liquid assets, totaling approximately $47 million, I leave to Emma Mitchell. The room exploded in chaos.
What? Margaret shrieked, jumping to her feet so violently that her chair toppled backward. That's absolutely impossible! There has to be some mistake, Thomas shouted, his face purple with rage. She's nobody! She's a complete stranger! Emma sat frozen in shock, unable to process what she had just heard. $47 million? It couldn't be real. There had to be some terrible mistake. Richard pounded his fist on the table. This is insane! We're his family, his blood! Elizabeth was crying with fury. How dare she manipulate our grandfather? Catherine was screaming about contesting the will, about fraud, about undue influence. Hayes raised his hand for silence, but the family continued shouting. Finally, he stood and spoke in a voice that commanded attention. Please, everyone sit down. There's more. Reluctantly, the family members returned to their seats, but their faces were filled with rage and disbelief. Harold anticipated this reaction. He included a personal letter explaining his decision. With your permission, I'll read it now. Hayes reached into his folder and removed a handwritten letter on Harold's personal stationery. Emma recognized the elegant handwriting from the business card Harold had given her. "My dear Emma, if you're hearing this, then I'm gone, and you're probably very confused and overwhelmed. Let me explain why I've made this decision. 3 weeks ago, in a supermarket parking lot, I showed you something I thought had disappeared from this world. Pure, selfless kindness. You see, Emma, I wasn't just some random elderly man struggling with groceries. I was Harold Whitman, one of the wealthiest men in this city. I owned 12 restaurants, 3 hotels, numerous real estate properties, and had investments worth more money than most people could spend in several lifetimes. But wealth, I learned over the years, has a way of revealing people's true nature, and what I discovered broke my heart. My own family, the people who should have loved me for who I was, visited me only when they needed money. My son, Thomas, called me perhaps once a month, and usually only when he wanted funding for some new business venture. My daughter-in-law, Margaret, made no secret of her anticipation of my death and the inheritance that would follow. My grandchildren were even worse. They had grown up entitled and spoiled, believing they deserved wealth simply because they carried the Whitman name. They had never worked for anything, never struggled, never learned the value of money or the importance of character. My so-called friends were equally disappointing. They invited me to parties and events only because of my wealth and connections. They called when they wanted donations or business deals. Not one of them knew the real Harold Whitman, and frankly, I'm not sure they would have cared to. That day in the parking lot, I was returning from my doctor's appointment. Dr. Martinez had just told me I had 6 months to live. Cancer, the same disease that took my beloved wife Margaret 5 years ago. I was feeling sorry for myself, sitting in that parking lot, when I decided to conduct an experiment. I wanted to see if genuine kindness still existed in this world. So I scattered my groceries intentionally and pretended to be helpless. Do you know what happened, Emma? 7 people walked past me. 7 people saw an elderly man struggling and chose to ignore him. A woman in an expensive coat actually stepped over a rolling can without even looking at me. A businessman walked by while talking on his phone, completely oblivious to my plight. But then you came along.
Emma, you had every reason to keep walking. I could see from your clothes, your tired eyes, your thin frame, that you were struggling financially. I later learned about your 2 jobs, your studies, your difficult circumstances. You were clearly exhausted, clearly in a hurry. You had nothing to gain by helping me. In fact, helping me cost you something. Your time, your energy, the risk of missing your bus. But you stopped anyway. And when I offered to thank you, your response stunned me. You said, just pass it forward when you can. You didn't want money. You didn't want recognition. You didn't even want my gratitude. You just wanted kindness to continue. That night, I went home and completely rewrote my will. You see, Emma, my family has had access to wealth their entire lives. They've received the best educations, driven luxury cars, lived in beautiful homes, traveled the world. They've never known want or struggle or the character-building experience of having to work for something. But they've also never shown the kind of spontaneous, selfless kindness you displayed in that parking lot. I'm giving you my fortune not just because you need it, though I know you do. I'm giving it to you because you've proven that you understand what really matters in life. You understand that our worth as human beings isn't measured by what we own, but how we treat others, especially those who can do nothing for us in return. My family will be furious. They'll call you a gold digger, a manipulator, a stranger who doesn't deserve their inheritance. But they're wrong. You're the only person I've met in years who truly deserves wealth, because you're the only person I've met who doesn't want it for selfish reasons. Use this money wisely, Emma. Become the doctor you dream of being. Help others the way you helped me. Establish charitable foundations, fund scholarships, make a difference in the world. And remember that true wealth isn't measured in dollars and cents. True wealth is measured in the kindness we show to strangers, the compassion we have for those less fortunate, and the love we give without expecting anything in return. You gave me hope that good people still exist in this world. Now I'm giving you the means to prove that good people can change the world. With deepest respect and admiration, Harold James Whitman. The room was completely silent, except for the sound of Emma's quiet sobbing. She had tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by Harold's words and the magnitude of what was happening. Hayes folded the letter carefully and looked around the room. There are additional provisions. Emma, Harold has established a trust fund specifically for your medical education, separate from the main inheritance. He's also left detailed instructions for financial advisors to help you manage the estate responsibly. Margaret Whitman's face was contorted with rage. This is absolutely outrageous. We'll contest this will. We'll prove she manipulated him. I'm afraid that won't be successful, Hayes replied calmly. Harold anticipated this reaction. The will was witnessed by 3 independent parties, including myself and 2 other attorneys. Harold underwent psychological evaluation to confirm his mental competency just 2 weeks before his death. The doctor's report states clearly that he was of sound mind and acting of his own free will. Thomas stood up aggressively, pointing at Emma. That little gold digger manipulated a sick old man. She probably researched him, found out he was wealthy, and targeted him. Actually, Mr. Whitman, your father specifically addressed this accusation. He made a video statement detailing his reasoning, and he had a private investigator confirm that Miss Mitchell never attempted to contact him after their meeting, never researched his background, and never even knew his wealth. Emma finally found her voice, though it was shaky with emotion. I can't accept this. This is too much. It should go to his family. Hayes smiled sadly. Emma, Harold knew you would say that. In fact, he specifically mentioned in his video that your first reaction would be to give the money to his family. That's exactly why he chose you. Elizabeth Whitman spoke up for the first time, her voice dripping with venom. What's to stop her from just taking the money and disappearing? What guarantee do we have that she won't waste it all? Hayes opened yet another folder. Actually, Harold thought of that as well. The inheritance comes with certain requirements. Emma must complete her medical degree with a minimum GPA of 3.5. She must establish a charitable foundation within 2 years to help struggling students. She must use at least 30% of the annual income from the estate for charitable purposes, and she must provide annual reports documenting how the money is being used to help others. Emma was overwhelmed. Why me? Why would he trust me with so much responsibility? Because, Hayes said, in Harold's own words from his video statement, she helped a complete stranger for no reason other than basic human kindness. That's the rarest quality in the world, and it's the only quality that can be trusted with great wealth. The Whitman family was beside themselves with fury. They began making threats, talking about hiring lawyers, investigating Emma's background, anything they could do to contest the will. But Hayes had prepared for this. I should mention that Harold also established a legal defense fund to protect Emma from any frivolous lawsuits or harassment. Any attempt to contest this will without legitimate grounds will result in the immediate forfeiture of all family bequests. One by one, the Whitman family members stormed out of the conference room, hurling accusations and threats. Margaret was the last to leave, stopping at the door to glare at Emma. "You'll never fit into Harold's world. You're nobody from nowhere, and all the money in the world won't change that." After they were gone, Emma remained in her chair, still trying to process what had happened. Hayes sat down next to her, his expression kind and understanding. "Emma, I knew Harold for 30 years. He was a good man who was deeply disappointed by the greed and selfishness he saw around him. Your simple act of kindness restored his faith in humanity. But I just helped him with his groceries. It wasn't anything special." That's exactly what made it special. In a world where people ignore those in need, where kindness has become conditional on what we can gain, your unconditional compassion was revolutionary. Hayes reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Harold left specific instructions for your transition into wealth. He understood that this would be overwhelming, so he arranged for financial advisors, legal counsel, and even a mentor to help you navigate this new world." Emma looked at the folder but didn't reach for it. "I don't know if I can do this. It's too much responsibility." "Harold believed you could," Hayes said gently. "And from what I've observed today, I believe he was right. You're more concerned about honoring his wishes and helping others than you are about the money itself. That's exactly the attitude Harold hoped for."
Emma stood in the main lecture hall of City Medical College, looking out at an audience of 50 students who had just received full scholarships from the newly established Harold Whitman Foundation for Medical Education. The transformation in Emma's life over the past 6 months had been remarkable. She had finished her second year of medical school with a perfect GPA, despite all the upheaval. She had moved from her tiny studio apartment to a modest but comfortable home near the hospital where she now volunteered. But the most significant change was the foundation she had established. Working with financial advisors and attorneys Harold had arranged for her, she had created a comprehensive scholarship program for students from low-income families who wanted to pursue careers in medicine. 6 months ago, I was exactly where many of you are today. I was working 2 jobs, surviving on ramen noodles, and wondering if I would ever be able to afford to complete my education. The scholarship recipients listened intently. They saw themselves in Emma's story. Harold Whitman taught me that kindness is never wasted. He showed me that sometimes a simple gesture can change not just one life, but many lives. The scholarship you're receiving today isn't just money for your education. It's an investment in your future ability to help others. In the front row sat Maria from the campus cafeteria, who had been struggling to pay for her daughter's pre-med studies. Next to her was James, a young man who had been working 3 jobs while trying to maintain his grades in his pre-med program. Emma had personally reviewed every scholarship application, looking for students who demonstrated not just academic ability, but also the kind of character Harold had valued. Students who had overcome adversity, who had shown kindness to others despite their own struggles, who understood that medicine was about service, not profit. After the ceremony, Emma drove to Riverside Cemetery as she did every weekend. She placed fresh flowers on Harold's grave, always the same type of flowers that had been in his scattered groceries that day they met. "Hi, Harold," she said softly, sitting on the grass next to his headstone. "The foundation awarded scholarships to 50 students this semester. That's 200 students total since we started." She updated him on her progress in medical school, her volunteer work at the free clinic she had established, and the positive changes she was seeing in the community. The free clinic treated over 3,000 patients last month, people who couldn't afford health care anywhere else. And the best part is, half of our volunteer staff are scholarship recipients from the foundation. They're already giving back. Emma smiled as she remembered the week before when she had been working at the clinic and a young mother had brought in her sick child. The woman had been crying because she couldn't afford the medication her daughter needed. Emma had quietly arranged for the foundation to cover the medication costs, but more importantly, she had connected the mother with job training programs and child care assistance. It wasn't just about treating the immediate problem. It was about addressing the root causes of poverty and lack of access to health care.
Your family still hasn't forgiven me, Emma told Harold with a sad smile. But Thomas actually called last week. He said he's been volunteering at a homeless shelter, trying to understand what you were teaching us about service to others. It was true. Thomas Whitman had surprised everyone by using his inheritance to establish a small nonprofit organization focused on job training for homeless individuals. It was a modest effort compared to Emma's foundation, but it represented a genuine change in his perspective. Margaret, Harold's daughter-in-law, remained bitter and hostile, but even she had softened slightly when Emma had established a scholarship program in the names of Harold's grandchildren, ensuring that other young people could benefit from educational opportunities. Richard, Elizabeth, and Catherine had completed their required year of volunteer service, and the experience had changed them in unexpected ways. Richard was now pursuing a career in social work, inspired by his time working with underprivileged children. Elizabeth had become involved with environmental causes, and Catherine was studying to become a teacher. "The thing about kindness," Emma said to Harold's gravestone, "is that it really does multiply. You showed kindness to me by trusting me with this responsibility, and now I get to show kindness to thousands of people every year." As Emma prepared to leave the cemetery, she noticed an elderly woman struggling with a heavy bag of cemetery flowers. Without hesitation, Emma walked over to help. "Excuse me, would you like some help with that?" The woman looked up gratefully. "Oh, bless you, dear. These old arms aren't what they used to be." Emma helped the woman carry the flowers to her husband's grave, listening as she shared memories of their 50-year marriage. When they reached the gravesite, the woman tried to offer Emma money for her help. "Oh no," Emma said with a smile. "Just pass it forward when you can." As Emma walked back to her car, she felt Harold's presence in the gentle breeze that rustled the cemetery trees. She knew he would be proud of what she had accomplished, but more importantly, she knew he would be proud of who she was becoming. The local newspaper ran a front-page story titled, "The Ripple Effect of Kindness: How One Good Deed Changed a City." The article detailed how Emma and Harold's story had created waves of positive change throughout the community. The Harold Whitman Foundation had now helped over 500 students pursue careers in medicine, nursing, and social work. But the impact went far beyond scholarships. Emma's example had inspired dozens of other charitable initiatives throughout the city. Young professionals are establishing mentorship programs, business owners are funding community health clinics, teachers are creating after-school programs for underprivileged children.
The free medical clinic Emma had established had become a model for similar programs in other cities. Medical students from around the country came to study their approach to community health care. More importantly, there had been a measurable change in the culture of the city. Social scientists studying the phenomenon found that people were significantly more likely to help strangers, volunteer for charitable causes, and engage in random acts of kindness. Emma's story had been featured in national magazines, medical journals, and inspirational books. She had been invited to speak at conferences around the country about the power of compassion in healthcare. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Dr. Martinez, Harold's oncologist, approached Emma at a medical conference. "Miss Mitchell, I was Harold's doctor during his final months. I wanted you to know that Helping you gave him more peace in his last weeks than any medicine I could have prescribed. He died knowing that his life had meaning beyond his business success. Emma kept a copy of Harold's letter framed in her office at the medical clinic, but her favorite piece of decoration was a simple handwritten note card on her desk. It held a quote from Harold's video message: "Kindness is the only investment that never fails to pay dividends." Every day, as Emma treated patients who couldn't afford care elsewhere, she remembered that cold Saturday when she helped an elderly man with his groceries. The moment had lasted perhaps 30 minutes, but its impact would continue for generations. The medical students who received scholarships from the Harold Whitman Foundation were required to sign a pledge promising to provide free medical care to underserved communities for at least 2 years after completing their training. Many of them exceeded this requirement, establishing careers dedicated to serving those most in need. Emma's own medical career was flourishing. She had been accepted into the pediatric residency program at Children's Hospital, where she would specialize in treating children from low-income families. Her professors praised not just her medical knowledge, but her exceptional compassion and bedside manner. "Emma has a gift," Dr. Thompson told her colleagues. "She doesn't just treat symptoms, she heals people. Her patients trust her completely because they can see that she genuinely cares about their well-being." Emma's personal life had also blossomed. She had formed close friendships with other scholarship recipients, creating a network of young medical professionals committed to social justice and community service. She had even begun dating Michael, a fellow medical student who shared her passion for serving underserved communities. Michael had been one of the first recipients of a Harold Whitman Foundation scholarship, and he understood Emma's commitment to honoring Harold's legacy. "I love that you've never let the money change who you are," Michael told her one evening as they walked through the same neighborhood where Emma used to live. "You're still the same person who would stop to help a stranger no matter what." Emma smiled. "Harold's money didn't make me wealthy. His trust in me made me wealthy. There's a difference."
Emma stood at the podium of the newly constructed Harold Whitman Center for Community Medicine, addressing a crowd of over 1,000 people gathered for the dedication ceremony. The center was Emma's vision made reality, a state-of-the-art medical facility that provided free health care to anyone who needed it, regardless of their ability to pay. It housed the foundation's offices, training facilities for medical students, research laboratories focused on public health, and a full-service clinic. 5 years ago, Emma told the crowd, a kind elderly man taught me that the smallest acts of kindness can have the greatest impact. Today, we dedicate this center to Harold Whitman's memory and to the principle that healthcare is a human right, not a privilege. In the audience sat hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by Emma's work, former scholarship recipients who were now practicing physicians, patients who had received free care at the clinic, community members who had been inspired to start their own charitable initiatives. Also in attendance were members of Harold's family. Thomas Whitman sat in the front row with his wife Margaret, both of them visibly moved by the ceremony. Their relationship with Emma had evolved from hostility to grudging respect to genuine affection. Thomas had become one of the foundation's most dedicated board members, using his business experience to help expand their programs. Margaret had established a support group for families dealing with cancer, inspired by Harold's battle with the disease. Richard, Elizabeth, and Catherine were all pursuing careers in public service, having discovered through their volunteer experiences that helping others was more fulfilling than any material possession. "My grandfather would be amazed by what Emma has accomplished," Richard said in an interview after the ceremony. "She took his gift and multiplied it 1,000-fold. She's proven that he chose the right person."
Emma's medical career had exceeded all expectations. She had completed her pediatric residency with honors and was now the director of pediatric services at the Harold Whitman Center. She specialized in treating children from disadvantaged backgrounds, and her patient outcomes were among the best in the city. But Emma measured success differently than most doctors. She counted the number of families she had helped escape poverty through healthcare advocacy and social services. She counted the number of medical students who had chosen careers in community medicine because of her example. She counted the ripple effects of kindness that continued to spread throughout the community. The Harold Whitman Foundation had expanded beyond medical scholarships to include programs for nursing, social work, public health, and medical research. They had established satellite clinics in rural communities, mobile health units for homeless populations, and telemedicine programs for isolated areas. Emma had also written a book about her experience, titled The Grocery Store Angel: How One Act of Kindness Changed Everything. All proceeds from the book went to fund additional scholarships and community health programs. 2 years later, Emma stood in the garden behind the Harold Whitman Center wearing a simple but elegant bridal dress. She was marrying Michael, who had proposed to her in the cemetery where Harold was buried, saying he wanted Harold's blessing for their union. The wedding was attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by Emma's work. Maria from the cafeteria was there, crying tears of joy for the young woman she had watched struggle and succeed. Mr. Romano from the restaurant attended, proud of his former dishwasher who had become a community leader. Dr. Thompson served as Emma's maid of honor, saying that Emma was like the daughter she never had. The Harold Whitman family attended as honored guests, having become like a second family to Emma. But the most poignant moment came when Emma placed her bridal bouquet on Harold's grave before the ceremony, thanking him once again for changing her life and giving her the opportunity to change so many others. "I wish you could be here to see this," she whispered to his gravestone. "You would love Michael. He has the same kind heart you did, and I promise you, we'll continue your work together."
Dr. Emma Mitchell Johnson stood in her office at the Harold Whitman Medical University, the institution that had grown from the original center. As the university's chancellor, she oversaw educational programs that trained hundreds of medical professionals each year, all committed to serving underserved communities. The scholarship program had helped over 10,000 students pursue careers in healthcare. The network of community clinics had expanded to serve millions of patients. The research programs had led to breakthrough treatments for diseases that disproportionately affected low-income populations. But perhaps Emma's greatest pride was in her own children, Harold, named after the man who had changed her life, and Margaret, named after Harold's beloved wife. Both children had grown up understanding the importance of service to others, and both were pursuing careers in medicine. Emma often told them the story of how their family's fortune had begun with a simple act of kindness in a grocery store parking lot. She wanted them to understand that wealth was not just about money, but about the responsibility to help others. Your grandfather, Harold, not your biological grandfather, but the man who gave us this opportunity, believed that kindness was the only true measure of a person's worth, Emma would tell them. Everything we have, everything we've accomplished, started with 30 minutes of helping a stranger with his groceries. On the 20th anniversary of Harold's death, Emma organized a citywide celebration of kindness. Thousands of people participated in volunteer activities, random acts of kindness, and community service projects, The mayor declared it Harold Whitman Day, an annual celebration of compassion and community service. Standing at Harold's grave that evening, surrounded by her family and hundreds of friends and colleagues, Emma reflected on the incredible journey that had begun with such a simple gesture. "Thank you, Harold," she said aloud, her voice carrying across the cemetery. "Thank you for seeing something in me that I didn't even see in myself. Thank you for trusting me with your legacy. And thank you for teaching me that the greatest wealth in life is the ability to make a difference in the lives of others." As the sun set over the city that had been transformed by Harold's vision and Emma's dedication, a gentle breeze rustled through the cemetery trees. Emma smiled, feeling Harold's presence and knowing that somewhere, somehow, he was proud of what his simple test of human kindness had accomplished. The story of Emma and Harold had become legend, told in schools to teach children about compassion, shared in churches to illustrate the power of selfless love, and studied in business schools as an example of ethical leadership. But for Emma, it remained what it had always been, a reminder that in a world that often seems harsh and uncaring, genuine kindness still has the power to transform everything. As she often told the students at the medical university, you never know when a small act of kindness might change someone's entire world. But more importantly, you never know when it might change your own. Harold Whitman had set out to test whether genuine kindness still existed in the world. In Emma Mitchell, he found his answer. And in finding that answer, he created a legacy that would continue to spread kindness and healing for generations to come. The grocery store where it all began had long since been demolished, replaced by a community park named Harold Whitman Memorial Garden. In the center of the park stood a simple bronze statue of an elderly man and a young woman helping each other with groceries. The inscription read, "Kindness is the only investment that never fails to pay dividends."